listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. Today, we're going to be talking about failure. I hate that word. I really, really hate it. Because in NLP, there's a saying that there is no failure, there's only feedback, in that you can't get things to such an extent where you fail because you've just found a way of not doing it. And you might find 10,000 ways of not doing it before you finally find a way to do it. So I'm going to use the word failure, even though it sort of gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I don't like it as a word, but a non-success, shall we say, as well. And we're going to talk about how failure and even neurochemicals, so the neurotransmitters in your brain, can actually be a really great positive for equestrian training. So we're going to look at how neuroscience impacts learning a beginner, understanding how your brain reacts to challenges and failure, in inverted commas, can make a big difference in your training and your progress. And even if you only want to hack, that's a terrible sentence as well, only want to hack, because I think hacking requires quite a lot of concentration and focus. So even if you want to hack and you don't want to compete and maybe you don't necessarily want to progress, but that you want to feel happy and enjoy yourself in the saddle, then that's a learning process as well. And we're going to talk about the role of neurochemicals and why failure is actually essential, and how we can use this knowledge to become better riders. So let's have a little think about the role of neurochemicals. As we know, equestrian training is much more than a physical skill. It's very much a mental game too. I would love to know how you break that down. Is it 80%, 20% for you? Which way round is it for you? Is it 80% mental, 20% physical? Is it 50-50? I'll be really interested. So let me know how you think of riding. And when we train horses, we often have to learn something new ourselves. We have to adjust to different situations, different horses, different movement, different way of going. We have to adjust to the horse's mental capacity, because obviously they get tired when they learn as well. And we have to work through several challenges. And at the core of all of this is how our brain processes information, how our brain reacts to mistakes, and can we stay motivated when we've had a run of mistakes or non-successes. Much of this is driven by the neurochemicals, substances that we've chatted about before, that you'll see on the internet and all over social media, things like dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, cortisol, all of those types of things that can really help us to stay focused and calm and energized as well. So if we take, for example, dopamine, because lots of people talk about this, and even if they don't talk about it for humans, they often talk about it for their animals as a calmer. So they often, if you look at the ingredients on a calmer, if you've got tryptophan in your calmer, tryptophan is a precursor to dopamine. Doesn't mean all your tryptophan that you put into your horse or your dog or your cat is all going to be converted to dopamine, but some of it might be if your horse or dog or cat is low on tryptophan, for example, or low on dopamine. So we've heard possibly about dopamine. It's associated with rewards. It's a feel-good chemical. It's that nice kind of fuzzy feeling when you've done something well. You know, it may only be a small step forward. It doesn't matter. you still get that dopamine rush. And dopamine not only helps us feel good after a win, a little victory, but it also plays a huge role in keeping us motivated throughout a tough training session or a tough schooling session or a tough ride of whatever description. When you're learning something new, like refining your canter, or learning a new dressage movement, or learning how to approach a certain style of jumps, maybe a combination or an upright, dopamine helps you to fuel that persistence, to keep going. It's not just about the satisfaction of success. It's the anticipation that you might succeed that keeps you going. So it's that anticipation, the what if, the really positive what if. What if I managed to do it this time? And that what if could also be said to be, what if I get a massive surge in dopamine and I feel really good? So for example, if you imagine you're working, let's say you're working on tricky jump course with your horse, and each time you successfully clear a jump, dopamine is released and you feel that rush of achievement. But dopamine is also released when you anticipate clearing the upcoming jumps. So it helps to keep you motivated and engaged in the training. Even if you face a few mishaps, let's say you get the wrong stride or you knock a pole, that anticipation of success afterwards keeps you going. So dopamine is really, really good at helping us to keep going, even if we've had some kind of blip. Now, failure could also be thought of as a great tool for learning. And as I've said before, we can think of failure as not quite succeeding this time. So in equestrian training, we do fail. You know, we might fail as a human, or maybe the horse hasn't quite received the communication correctly, or it's the very first time a horse is doing something and they don't quite get what you mean. And again, that may be down to our communication, but it may also be that the horse is thinking, why do I have to pirouette? What on earth is the use of me twiddling myself around? So we do have non-successful moments, and we may also fail, if you like. We may get an incorrect canter lead. We may miss a jump. We may have a refusal. We may have all kinds of things going on, but that failure is really crucial to the learning process. So here's the interesting thing. Failure is a power tool when you think about learning, succeeding, and getting better. So it's not about beating yourself up. It's about how your brain reacts to the mistakes. When you fail or you have a non-success that you were expecting to be successful or hoping, then your body releases adrenaline. In the US, it's often called epinephrine, but it's the same chemical. And this triggers the stress response. And the stress response, depending on the severity, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can actually help you to improve your focus. So a whiff of stress can actually work in your favor because it will improve your focus and your memory and the brain's ability to learn. So that's a good thing. So, you know, sometimes when you talk to people who compete a lot at whatever level, could be at the highest level, they will say, you know, before they go into the ring, they do have a flutter of nervousness. Now, they're not nervous about what they have to do. They're not not about the size of the jumps or the dressage moves. That they're not bothered about that, but they have this little stress, minor micro stress response that's helping them a little bit. So it's not fear. It's a natural response. It's on the edge of excitement, and it's helping them because adrenaline also stimulates neuroplasticity, which is the way that the brain reorganizes nervous connections. So it's forming new connections in those moments. And at that point, when you have that little whiff of nerves and the brain is better able to learn from failure and adjust, you're quicker to adjust. So let's say you're coming into a jump, you're on the wrong stride, wrong angle, but you've got that little tiny whiff of nerves because you realize this in the moment. You think, oops, this isn't good. And you adjust as best you can in the moment. So it's helping you. Obviously, there's a threshold here, and we don't want to get to the point of stress where we're really tense and actually we're a bit scared. This is just very low level. So, for example, let's say you're trying to master a flying change, but it's just not quite clicking with you and your horse. Every time you ask, the horse isn't quite responding as you would like or as you expect. And each time you fail, adrenaline is working behind the scenes to help your brain to think about what's going wrong. Is it your position? Is it your communication? And each time, if it's that low level of adrenaline, it will think about a different way of doing it, a different way of asking the question. So that failure or non-success is actually helping your brain to reorganize itself and refine your technique, and it's making you better for the next attempt. Now, we know that too much stress and leading to anxiety, leading to fear, isn't good. That's going to discourage you, especially if you start to face several setbacks or you just feel that you can't get something right, then that has really stepped over the threshold and that is no longer helping us. So we've got to keep this at low level. So if we think about that too much stress versus a productive failure or productive non-success. Equestrians, we go through so many ups and downs in our training, and actually non-success is very regular. And it's important not to overwhelm yourself with too much stress, because that's where you get the cortisol, the stress hormone. And whilst cortisol is essential for managing that short-term stress, too much cortisol leads to mental fatigue and demotivation. So if you think about the times when you've been overwhelmed in the past by a tough training session or schooling session, whether it was a new jumping technique or working through a difficult riding pattern, if the frustration gets to be too much, the cortisol levels rise and it starts to feel like you're in a rut. You can't get out. You feel like you're completely stuck. But when the training is balanced with moments of success and breaks to recharge, then you can use the failure to your advantage. You can have the cortisol levels drop. You can get down to a point where, again, your brain is working for you. So, for instance, let's say you're working on a challenging dressage test and you miss the timing on a transition. Your horse doesn't respond because you're a bit late with your aids. So instead of continuing to push through the frustration, you take a step back. You might bring your horse back to walk or a nice easy trot, even halt, and you take a few deep breaths and allow you and your horse to have a reset moment. This will help to lower your cortisol levels and then approach the task with a clearer mindset, because you've now gone below that stress threshold. You're now in that really low level stress where your brain can actually start to make these new connections and think about, how can I approach that differently? How can I think about it differently? And come back fresher and maybe calmer and more focused to tackle the challenge. What then about dopamine? I mentioned dopamine before. How do we stay motivated through tough times? Because there are a lot of tough times for riders. As we know, mindset is crucial. And if we view a failure as a personal defeat, it really does dampen down our motivation. But if we reframe failure as an opportunity to learn something, to improve our skill set, then we can use that dopamine to keep moving forward. So when we face the setbacks in training, if we view them positively and you think, right, so maybe it's because this is a different horse for you, or maybe you're trying something brand new, then you can think to yourself, this is part of my journey. I'm learning how to ride this particular horse and this particular movement or this particular jump. And so it kind of reinforces the fact that you're persisting, you're even thinking about the fact that you're learning, and so you get that dopamine again. I've mentioned before, the dopamine, sometimes it's not necessarily what you've done, it's what you're anticipating and the positivity you're anticipating that also causes dopamine to be released and for you to feel good and keep going. What about building tolerance to failure? Oh gosh, there's a lot of time, isn't there, in riding when we have periods where things aren't going right. Now, serotonin, another neurochemical, plays a really vital role in helping us manage failure and to stay calm. So whether we're preparing for a competition or working through some problem that we have, the ability to remain calm and focused, even in adversity, is obviously essential. Serotonin helps us manage stress and maintain a sense of balance, even when things don't go as they're planned. So let's say you're at a show and you're feeling nervous before a jump round. The serotonin levels in your brain are key to helping you stay calm and focused. So how can we maintain serotonin? Well, again, if you look at your horse's karma, or, you know, they do them for dogs and cats as well. If you look in the list of ingredients, if you've got tyrosine in there, tyrosine is a precursor to serotonin. And just like with the tryptophan and dopamine, it doesn't mean that all of that tyrosine is going to get used to make serotonin, but maybe some of it will. So there are things like that, but there's natural ways to boost serotonin. Exercising. I know that as a rider, you know, we get a lot of exercise riding. We get a lot of exercise mucking out, carting muck to muck heaps and carrying water and carrying hay nets. But if you can do some other kind of exercise, and I know it's really difficult to find time, especially if it's the winter time for you and you're in the northern hemisphere, it's quite challenging, but exercise does boost serotonin. Also, a huge amount of serotonin is produced by our gut. It's produced by the microorganisms in our gut. So if we keep them happy, we avoid too much sugar and too much starch, and we start to think about eating well. then that keeps the little microbes very happy and they produce serotonin for us. Any kind of stress management technique that you might do, whether it is going for a walk or doing some yoga or Pilates or whatever you might do, that will also boost and keep your serotonin levels at a good level. So I suppose then, to conclude, understanding neurochemicals like dopamine, adrenaline and serotonin really affect how we learn and progress from non-successes and make a huge difference to our level of motivation and our resilience and tolerance to non-successes. And it means that actually failure or non-success doesn't need to be feared, because it's a very, very natural part of knowing that you're only failing or having non-successes because your brain is learning and adapting and, I suppose, growing, making us become better riders. So the next time that you're working through something that's quite challenging to you, remember, failure's not the end. It's actually opportunity and it's part of the process. And if you can embrace it and understand that your brain is responding to it, so long as it's at a low level of stress, then this will keep you motivated, calm, and ready to improve. I hope that's been useful for you. Do let me know. I just have one little announcement. If you're listening on Samsung podcasts are stopping on the 1st of December. So you might need to go to some other platform. A lot of people who listen to this podcast are on Apple, but if you're Samsung, you probably don't like Apple. But Spotify, Amazon, even Google, all are great podcast platforms. And there are a huge number of other platforms as well. If you like this episode, if you like this podcast, please do leave me a review, leave me some stars and download, because that means the podcast gets seen and heard by more and more people. We have a bigger reach. It means that I'm able to keep asking lots and lots of super guests on. Next time, talking of super guests, Sue Dyson. So take care, and I'll see you again really soon.